and get started if you're ready. Today, we are joined by historian and journalist David Mould. Welcome, and you can take it off.
Okay, wow, that was a short introduction,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Well, Celeste, thanks to you and for the library for putting this on. And as I say, I'm sorry to drag people away from their TVs for 45 minutes or so, but I hope you find the journey worthwhile. And so, is everybody seeing my PowerPoint okay? I just want to check that. You're going to okay. All right. So we're going to be talking about borders. I have a new book that came out in November called Postcards from the Borderlands, and it kind of brings together some of my many experiences over the years, both in crossing borders and also thinking about borders. And I guess the key question that sort of fascinated me is when we think about borders, are they simply fences and walls and border posts or things like that, physical barriers, some of which take no account of geography or language or culture, or should we think about them rather more broadly, borders within countries and also kind of the borders of our minds, the way we think about unfamiliar places. So, kind of, here are my qualifications to talk about borders. I've been a whole lot of places in the last 25 years, and I'm not going to read the list. You can look at it there. But I've been fortunate enough to travel not only in Asia, mostly in Asia, more Asia than anywhere else, working as a trainer, a researcher, and consultant. I retired from the university as a faculty member a few years ago, and I've been working for international agencies, most recently UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund. And so in the process, I've been to a lot of places and I've had to cross a lot of borders. And let's start here, I think, on familiar ground here. And I want to sort of start thinking about how we conceive of borders. So, I'm not. Yeah, I'm going to pick on New York because that's fine. Um, you know, what are the borders of New York City? And I mean, this is a classic map from somebody called Daniel Wallingford. It was published in 1932. New Yorker's idea of the United States of America. And as you can see, Brooklyn and Manhattan and and Staten Island are kind of outsized in proportion to their actual size there. And poor old Boston's just a little village on Cape Cod. And Illinois, I think your area, has moved much further west than it should be, and I don't even find Iowa that area. Everything kind of gets mixed up, as you move further west. So, I mean, this he sold this by mail order, and we can laugh about it, but it does, in a sense, support a lot of the research that's been done, serious research that's been done, that show that we tend to enlarge the borders of the places we know, the places we live, in terms of their physical size, their geographical size, and their importance. And so, here, this is another example of the New Yorker cartoon from 1976. And so, Jersey is sort of briefly there. I mean, the rest of the United States is compressed into, I don't know, a couple of New York City blocks there. As I said, the point I'm trying to make here is that there are these borders in our minds, the way in which we, even though at one level we kind of know, oh, yes, sure, a certain state or a certain country is a certain size, still in our minds, we tend to enlarge and compress places. Now, let's look at Africa. Africa is pretty interesting here. the major misperception about the size of Africa, and you can look at the map on the left here and see how much would fit into Africa, you know, is about its size. And this is a result of something called the Mercator projection, which was introduced in the 16th century for navigation, latitudes and longitudes. And, it's fine for navigation, but what it did was it made countries or land areas closer to the poles appear much larger than they were, and land areas closer to the equator, such as Africa or South Asia, smaller. Um, but again, if you look at the standard maps of the world using the Mercator projection, you would not think that Africa could include all of this area. It looks much smaller than it actually is. It's the second largest continent, about 20% of the world mass, larger than North America by about 2 million square miles. So let's look at another interesting map here. Now, this one actually is a few feet from where I'm sitting right now. This hangs on my wall. This is part of a map, a Soviet map of the United States. And there's a kind of interesting story here in terms of, both how I came by it and the way in which it projects or shows the United States. So this, as I say, is the it's northeastern United States, Pennsylvania, New York, kind of up to Massachusetts there, and it's a historical map of the United States from the end of the 19th century to the early 20th century. I was in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia, actually in the mid 1990s, and I bought this at a bookstore. Well, it'd be interesting. I didn't know much Russian at the time. I got to the airport, and the customs officials at the border unpacked my suitcases, and they said, "Aha, it is prohibited to export historical maps." And I had some Russian there at that time. I said, "Oh, please show me the regulation here. That sounds a little bizarre." So we argued for a little while. Anyway, I said, "Look, a map like this hung on school walls throughout the Soviet Union for decades. What am I going to do with it? Use it to plan an invasion of the United States. So we had a little joke about it. They confiscated a few knickknacks and they went on their way. But when my Russian was better, I started to study this map in a little bit more detail. And I was confused by the symbols on the map. Now, mostly it's a kind of an, economic geography map. And the legend on the right, if anybody watching knows any Russian, but it shows mineral deposit, ugol, coal, neft, oil, and железные руги, which is iron ore. So it showed, mineral deposits around the United States. You can see a few of those black triangles and squares on the map here. But the thing that really fascinated me was all of those red flags. What are these? And I started looking at the dates under them, and then eventually figured it out. These were the dates of scenes of major strikes and industrial unrest in the United States, mostly in the latter part of the 19th century into the 20th century. And so the history of the United States was being taught to Soviet school children through this sort of ideological lens of strikes and labor unrest. And the red flags are the most prominent things on the map. They're more prominent than the dots that show cities and other elements on the map. So I found this sort of kind of very interesting because it sends a not so subtle message about borders. The real borders of the United States, as taught to Soviet school children, are not state borders. They're the borders between the capitalist bosses supported by the government and the working classes ready to rise in revolution. So I found this quite interesting, just the way in which the borders within the United States, if I could put it that way, were portrayed in this map. Now, here's another interesting one. Okay, um, uh, this notion that United States, well, I'm sure, and in fact Russian media over the last day or so has been pushing this line again, that the United States is divided by class warfare, strikes, racial oppression, that survived the fall of the Soviet Union. And this is a map which was produced by a guy called Igor Panarin, who was a former KGB analyst, and he was dean of the Foreign Ministry's Academy for Future Diplomats. And he predicted that just as the Soviet Union uh, had fallen apart, the USSR, so the United States was going to fall apart. A combination of mass immigration, economic decline, moral degradation, the US would break up. Now, let's see. I guess you guys are going to be part of Canada. Congratulations. I'm going to join the European Union, I believe, where I live. Now, it looks funny here, but this was widely circulated in media. And when I was traveling in Central Asia in 2011, 2012, cab drivers would say to me, they said, "When is the United States going to break up?" And I go, "I don't think it's going to." And they say, "Oh, well, this has been widely predicted, and here is the evidence." So this was kind of the conspiracy theory there. Now, as an academic, Panarin did a qualification. He said, "Well, actually, the risk of disintegration is 45 to 55%, but that caveat was usually left off the media reports that went with the map." But you can sort of see how this is sort of attractive to people who were, bewailed the end of the Soviet Union and kind of hoped that the same thing, if it was going to happen, would happen to the US. So, what do we take away from this? We all tend to construct mental maps based on our political views, our culture, and and looking at the world, some of the borders that actually exist, the political borders, don't seem to make any more sense than our mental maps. When I was growing up in the United Kingdom, I was a history major in college, and I was studying 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century European history. I had to keep track of all of these shifting borders when these wars were going on, who owned Alsace-Lorraine now and stuff like that. And so, but when I opened the atlas and I started looking particularly at the Middle East and Africa and Asia, I started having other questions in my mind. Why are some countries really strangely shaped? Why are all these straight line borders, particularly in the Middle East and Africa? Who drew these borders and why? So let's look at Africa first, okay? And the story here really kind of starts. It's a colonial story. The people who drew the boundaries of Africa were the colonial powers sitting around conference tables in European capitals, particularly the Berlin Conference of 1884. And they carved up the continent into spheres of influence, and then over the next half century, they sent out surveyors and boundary commissions to actually draw the borders. And this is one of my absolutely favorite quotes from the British Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury. And he's meeting with his French counterparts in London, and they're trying to draw the boundary between Nigeria, a British colony, and Niger, a French colony, in 1899. And he said, "We've been giving away mountains and rivers and lakes to each other, hindered only by the small impediments. We never exactly knew where they were." So, it's this sort of crazy, division of land, which is not based on geography, It's not based on where ethnic groups are. It's just arbitrary. They're drawing it in European capitals. And so the boundaries of Africa cut across traditional ancient kingdoms, across geographical lines, ethnic groups lines, and all of that. Now, there's a couple of principles involved here I think we need to understand. I'm going to mangle the Latin here. Uti possidetis juris, as you possess under the law. I think it's really important to understand this, to understand how we got the boundaries we get today. Basically, the principle here, and this principle was adopted first in South America when the Spanish and the Portuguese empires were dissolved in the 19th century, was okay, to avoid border disputes, we're going to create countries based on the borders were set by the colonial powers. That's the easiest way to do it. So when Argentina and Chile and Peru and Ecuador became countries, they retained their Spanish colonial borders, Brazil, the Portuguese. The alternative to this is a little messier. It's called self-determination, where people kind of decide where their borders are going to be. And, this can be a recipe for smaller ethnically or religiously based sovereign states. But, the principle uti possidetis juris has really been applied pretty frequently when colonies became independent, with one big exception we'll get to later. So look at these two maps of Africa, okay? And again, the Mercator projection doesn't show it as large as it should be. But here we have colonial Africa on the left, and we have post-colonial Africa on the right. And the boundaries haven't changed much. There've been a few changes here and there, but basically all of these African countries, when they gained independence, they took their colonial era boundaries. Boundaries, again, which paid no attention to where ethnic groups were, topography, language, culture, all of those other factors. So this is one of the reasons why there are so many disputes within Africa today, so many separatist movements, because these countries are living with the colonial boundaries that they inherited. And this, again, is one of my favorite maps. Okay, so what might have been, this is what we would call a counterfactual, I guess. This is a lovely map by a Swedish artist, a guy called Nikolai Sian. And what he did was he did a study of Africa kind of on the eve of the colonial carve-up in 1844. And he looked at traditional kingdoms here, and traditional boundaries, and sort of drew this map. And the fact that Africa appears to be upside down in Islamic cartography, the south was often what we would perceive to be the north. So this is particularly interesting. Now, what would have happened if these boundaries, many more countries than we have in Africa today, had been used rather than, the colonial boundaries? We'll never know. But this is actually a more representative map of what we would call the principle of self-determination. Africa as it might have been. And then there's the Africa of our minds as well. I love the cartoon on the left from the Philadelphia Inquirer, which sort of pokes fun at, how we may look at it. Now, the one on the right, though, actually may be more informative. So there's been a number of studies done here, but basically, this is the Google autocomplete map. Okay, and so if you type into Google, why is Nigeria so? this is the answer you get: poor, or uh, why is why is Angola so expensive? um, so most of the countries are poor. Some of them are not terribly poor, actually. A few hot, a few dangerous, a few expensive. Morocco's that expensive, but but these are some of the kind of again, kind of these sort of mental boundaries or these mental images that get fed into our sort of collective consciousness there. Okay, we're going to move on to what I think is the most important and also the most tragic story of borders, which is the partition of British India along religious lines in 1947. Now, I'm going to have to summarize 200 years of history in a couple of sentences here, but British India, British colonial India, was cobbled together, I literally mean cobbled together, by conquest and alliance over about a century and a half by the East India Company, the British East India Company, which started out as a sort of a trading company but developed basically into a military power. So if you were an Indian Maharaja in the late 19th century and you wanted to, invade the neighboring Maharaja state, you'd hire the British East India Company to supply you with some troops to go do it. So it became a large mercenary army until the British government, alarmed at what it was doing, disbanded it. But anyway, by the time we have the Indian independence movement, led by Mahatma Gandhi and others, and we have World War II, and it becomes clear after World War II that Britain has to give independence to British India, we have this situation and the map on the right does not show it accurately, it shows some of it. In 1947, British India had 8 large provinces, 5 minor provinces, and a total of 565 princely states, some small, some large, ruled by people like Maharajas. They weren't all Maharajas. And those states were technically not under British rule, but the British controlled defense and foreign affairs. So what's going to happen here? Okay, how is this country going to become independent? So let me again try to be fairly brief here. After World War II, and I've circled Hyderabad here, a place where I've spent some time, some of the larger princely states, such as Hyderabad, which had a Muslim ruler and mostly Hindu population, said, hey, we want to be a country ourselves, the country of Hyderabad. And we want to basically follow that principle of uti possidetis juris, which says, these divisions that existed in colonial times should be applied to the whole country. And Hyderabad, for a country like Hyderabad, a state like Hyderabad, it would have made sense. Hyderabad in 1947, it was about as large as Britain itself in land area. Its economy was the size of Belgium's, and it had a population of 16 million. It would have been a viable country on its own. However, think about how the principle would have been applied if you allow Hyderabad to become, as a princely state, to become an independent country. You've got all these other little princely states there. So you would have created almost 600 new countries in British India, which would have been kind of a political, economic, and certainly a cartographic train wreck waiting to happen there. So instead, what happened is the princely states, such as Hyderabad, and we'll come to Bengal in a moment, they opted to join either India or Pakistan, based primarily on whether the majority of their population were Hindu or Muslim. So we have this principle in a sense of kind of religious self-determination, which divided up British India. And this divided people who had lived together, mostly peacefully, for centuries. And it was a tragic story. Millions of people fled their homes. There was communal violence that exists even today. A place I've spent a lot of time recently in Bangladesh, which was the former East Pakistan. And um, I, this is particularly interesting. The British had tried to divide up what was the province of Bengal in 1905, arguing it was too large to administer. And so they created a mostly Hindu West Bengal and a mostly Muslim East Bengal. And the Bengalis, who shared language and culture and, didn't feel divided by religion, protested, and the British abandoned the venture. But, they felt more united by language and culture than divided by religion. And before 1947, there were calls for an independent Bengal. Again, like Hyderabad, it would have made a valid, religiously mixed, but economically, I think, fairly prosperous country. But that was not to be. The deciding factor was religion. Majority Muslim or majority Hindu, Pakistan or India. So you sort of see on the map here that post-independence East Pakistan ended up with pretty much the same borders as the ones that the British had designed back in 1905, a recipe for decades of conflict. And how was this done? There was this guy, British Cyril Radcliffe, who was sent to India, had no experience there, and he was given about 6 weeks to draw the borders. Now, the big problems were in 3 states, Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, and Bengal, which had roughly the same numbers of Hindus and Muslims. He had outdated census data, outdated maps. The British were in a hurry to leave, and when independence came to India and Pakistan in August 1947, 12 million people found themselves on the wrong side of the line, tried to move. Nobody knows how many people died in the religious violence. And I love the quote from him at the bottom. He never went back. He never went back to India. Not his fault. He was given an impossible task. So then we get to the Pakistan problem. So we have, these 2 Muslim, quote unquote, Muslim states, West and East Pakistan. They're separated by 1,400 miles of India. Is this a viable country? No. And so the political powers in West Pakistan, East Pakistan had very little in common with the West. West Pakistan tried to impose a language, their language Urdu, on East Pakistan, where people speak Bengali or Bangla. There were protests over the years, culminating in the 1971 Liberation War, which India supported, which led to the independence of Bangladesh. But it shows, shall we say, the folly of using the principle of religion to create borders. So, as I say, I've spent quite a bit of time in Bangladesh, and I started talking to people. I was working with universities there about the border because it looks sort of really, really crazy. It's almost half as long as the US-Canada border, and it sort of snakes in and out all over the place. It's again about the again it's the product of the way in which it was drawn in 1947, and very appropriate for where you are. Bangladesh is about the size of Illinois or Iowa. Now, it has 170 million people living there, about half the population of the United States. So it's a crowded country within those borders, and they've been taking in Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, so it's even more crowded than it was. Um, but sort of this sort of crazy border snaking in and out all over the place as Radcliffe and his assistants tried to sort of figure out where the Muslims were and where the Hindus were. Now, until 2015, it was even longer because there were all of these what were called territorial enclaves, called chitmatals there. And an enclave is an area of one country that is surrounded by another country. And there aren't many left in the world. Germany and Italy each have one in Switzerland. Belgium's got a couple in the Netherlands. There are a few around. But look, there are more than 160 in this small area of northwestern northwestern East Pakistan. Um, the Economist once called this the world's craziest border. So how did this happen? This is an older map here, and it looks like this kind of like the border's broken out into a rash there or something like that. Looks very unhealthy at all. But these little dots are all of these little enclaves here. And there's a lovely story, but I think it's fanciful, about the two of the princes, one in a state called Cooch Behar, which today is in India, and one in Rangpur, which is now in Bangladesh. And they used to get together and play chess, and they used villages or rice fields as wages. And so they suddenly, grabbed pieces of other people's territory. Now, that didn't make any difference to people. They were all part of British India. But once the borders were drawn in 1947, suddenly you found yourself in this little area surrounded by another country. You had to cross the border, but you didn't have a passport. You couldn't get to the government office. You couldn't get to the health clinic. More likely it was a result of some messy treaties. But when the borders were drawn in 1947, essentially they created all of these little enclaves of people who were essentially stateless. It was very difficult to travel, to get a passport, the utility lines stopped there. I mean, people were kind of left in stateless limbo, and it took until 2015 to sort this out because of rivalry between India and Pakistan, and then India and Bangladesh. Eventually, it was sorted out in 2015. I think all but one of the enclaves were removed. But again, this is a good example of the craziness of borders. Okay, I think we're doing okay for time. We're going to shift. Okay. I think I said all of this already, so I don't need that slide. Okay. So the area where I started working overseas for the first time was in Central Asia. And in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan a little bit. And I would come back to my university and people say, "Where have you been?" I said, "I've been to Kyrgyzstan." They went, "Where? Is that Kurdistan?" I said, no, Kyrgyzstan, not Kurdistan. And so, the New Yorker cartoon on the right is a lovely sort of play on, again, our sort of notions of an area of the world, an area of Asia that we don't know. And I love some of these names. I really like Hip Hopper Bad, forget about it, Stan. And there's some famous examples of people who should know better getting this region of the world confused. So John Kerry, when Secretary of State, creating the new country of Kazakhstan, putting two together, and when Condoleezza Rice briefed George Bush on Uzbekistan, he was reported to have said, "Stan who?" And my colleagues just said to me, they gave up. They said, "Oh, you've just been in Stanland." And actually that makes no sense at all, because the word Stan in Persian means land. So literally I'd been to Landaland. So let's look at how those borders were created. And it's a very similar story to what happened in Africa, except here the colonial power is both first Russia and then the Soviet Union. So just briefly here, again, I'm just trying to compress hundreds of years of history into a couple of sentences. In the late 19th century, the armies of Tsarist Russia advanced across Siberia and into what today is Central Asia, to the steppe, to the mountains. There were kind of little kingdoms there, khanates that were suppressed, and then the Soviet Union inherited all of this territory. And for the Soviets, the big fear was that ethnic loyalties and Islam in Central Asia would create a threat. So what they did was they rather arbitrarily drew borders. It's a classic case of gerrymandering, and they created nationalities. I don't know if any of you know this region, but the Kazakh and the Kyrgyz are almost indistinguishable in terms of their ethnic features, their physical features, and their language. And the story I tell is, some cartographer gets down in the stream and he points to a herder on one mountaintop and says, "You're a Kazakh," and he points to another one, and the other one says, "You're a Kyrgyz." They artificially created these Soviet socialist republics and trying to give people a new national identity, which was not Islamic, and it was not related to their tribe or their clan, the traditional ways in which people would have identified it. So that was okay, I suppose, but when you get to independence, the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, it's rather like what happened in Africa. Suddenly, if you're when the Soviet Union existed, people were able to move relatively freely, between the Soviet socialist republics, to shop, to go to school, to visit relatives, to do what normal people do. But suddenly, when these countries became independent, when the Kazakh SSR became Kazakhstan, suddenly you were in a country and your relatives in Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan, you were not able to get there anymore. So what happened was that herders were not able to get to their pastures. People were not able to visit, nearby towns to shop or travel. So artificial barriers were created. In the Soviet times, people could move relatively freely. Once these countries, these artificial gerrymandered SSRs became independent countries, suddenly you had a national, a political border. This is an area in southern Kyrgyzstan and eastern Uzbekistan, a rich agricultural area called the Fergana Valley. And look at how the borders were drawn, okay? And this again was an example of the Soviets creating borders, and they even created a couple of little enclaves you can see down the bottom there, Sok and Shakhimadan, of Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan's the green, Kyrgyzstan is the white, and there's a bit of Tajikistan that's white there. So it's this crazy border drawing to, again, try to keep the tribal groups under control. And so we've got this bit of Tajikistan that pops into the Fergana Valley. It's separated from the rest of the country by a mountain range. And so this again is a recipe for conflict. And there have been conflicts between ethnic groups there. Osh, the city, actually the first city where I worked, is about half Uzbek. Okay, but the Kyrgyz are in control there. So again, in Soviet times, it didn't matter too much. When national borders were created, it became a big issue. And so The conflicts are over all sorts of things, natural resources. Kyrgyzstan has water in its mountains, which Uzbekistan needs for its cotton fields. But and Uzbekistan has natural gas that Kyrgyzstan needs for its, industry and home heating. Again, in Soviet times, it didn't matter. They were all part of the Soviet Union. But when the borders were drawn, suddenly Kyrgyzstan is holding back the water and Uzbekistan is shutting off the gas. And I've been in Osh in winter and it's cold when Uzbekistan shuts off the gas. So the two cities here, Osh and Jalalabad, they're the second and third largest cities in Kyrgyzstan. As you see, they're bisected, they're divided by a whole lump of Uzbekistan. So the straight way to get there, about 30 miles, is a direct line through Uzbekistan. But because of the borders, because the border guards will hit people up for fines and fees and stuff like that, most drivers take this long way around to this little place called Uzgen to get to there. So, again, it's very symptomatic of the way that borders have been drawn. Okay, and this is going to be my last section here. Okay, my cartographic crimes. Okay, it's time to confess, and if you want to report me, that's okay. So borders are very sensitive for governments, okay? And so I have knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, but also knowingly, violated this section of India's 1961 Criminal Law Amendment Act, which forbids me or anybody from publishing, or in the case of customs, importing a map which shows India's borders incorrectly. Oh dear, I'm sorry. Now, the trouble is all about this area. I'll show you that. Jammu and Kashmir was one of those states which had about, a mixed Hindu and Muslim population. And as with Bengal, a line was drawn, giving part of it to Pakistan and part of it to India. And China grabbed a bit during a 1962 war. But if you look at the map, official India map, the whole province is shown as part of India, even though Pakistan controls about 30% of it. Been 3 wars over Kashmir. Everybody knows that Pakistan controls part of Kashmir and that there are a lot of troops there along the line of control. But India is incredibly sensitive about this issue, and so on official India maps, of which I've been guilty of violating the law, it's shown as part of all as part of India. And it gets really interesting when we think about Google Maps. I mean, on many maps we can sort of show some detail, some nuance here. But Google, Google wants to do business both in India and Pakistan, and is, shall we say, sensitive to local political preferences. So if you're sitting in India and you're looking at a map of Kashmir, it's the one on the right, it shows the whole of Kashmir as part of India. Lovely. But if you're in Pakistan and you're looking at the same Google map, or not same Google map, you're looking at a Google map, that border which goes sort of north of Srinagar there, that's the line of control. Islamabad is in Pakistan. It shows the real border there. So, this kind of gets me to the point of, borders, yes, are real, but they're also perceptual. And India is never going to admit that Pakistan controls or, has territorial sovereignty over part of Kashmir. So, So I think I'll be really happy to take some questions. Let me just say, that what I presented here is based on the last chapter of my book, with some other things thrown in there. Um, I do kind of weekly travel essays, and if you want to get on my list, you don't have to read them, but I'll be happy to add you to my list. It goes through MailChimp. Just send me an email. But thank you for your attention, and I'll be really happy to take questions and suggestions for improvement. Okay. So people can put their mics on, I think, yeah.
All right. Do we have any questions? Our participants.
Yep. You'll need to unmute your mic if you've got a question there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear, I stunned everybody.
I don't have any question because I'm totally unfamiliar with that area. So, but I thank you because that helps me a bit know that area. That's like foreign. Well, yeah, it is foreign, but I mean that's really foreign to me. Those areas. So I feel like I know a wee bit more now.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I'm glad that's the case. I hope you sort of, yeah. And I mean, this sort of came out of my sort of as a child, kind of opening the atlas and going, why is this country shaped that way? And, so I mean, I hope as you are kind of travel or think about the world, you kind of raise some of those questions again. I guess if I have a sort of a mission, that's it, to get people to think more critically about, how countries are shaped and formed. Yeah.
So what part of the UK are you from, David?
Originally from southwest London, Surrey border, although I worked as a journalist in the north of England in Yorkshire for 8 years before.
I'm a dual citizen, UK and US, and we lived in Surrey.
Me too. Yeah. Hi. Where are you from?
Well, originally from the US, but I married a Brit.
Oh, okay.
We lived in Surrey.
Oh, where in Surrey?
Addlestone.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I was born in Epsom, so yeah, I kind of away from it. Yeah. All right, okay. Yeah, at one time I thought joint US-UK citizenship was an advantage, but with Brexit, I'm not so sure.
I'm not sure either, but it's it's a good talking point.
It's good. Yeah. My sister moved to France 10 years ago, so whatever.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do we have any more questions? If not, I would like to thank David again. As you said, it does. I guess I would never have even thought to think about borders like that, and it does just bring up a lot of interesting points and a lot of like new considerations when thinking about countries and their shapes and traveling in them, and what borders, what they do. But thank you again for talking. I want everybody to know that the library does have his book, Postcards from the Borderland. We're processing it right now, and it will be available shortly. So if you're interested in renting a copy of it, give us a call, and we will get that all set up for you. And then just as another reminder, our 2021 winter program is coming up. So get on our website and see all of the different programs that we have lined up for February. If there's not any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you again to David, and thank you for everybody for joining.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Terry, for the library doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm sorry. Are you Terry or are you Celeste?
I'm Celeste.
Oh,
We
okay.
have one we have one Zoom account that we pay for, so we have
Oh, I see. Okay, so
special
you.
privileges.
All right. Yeah. So you're having a temporary identity crisis here, right?
Oh, yep.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, everybody. I understand you've got a lot of snow there. Stay warm, stay safe, and as you travel, the open maps, just think about those borders and ask yourself some questions. Okay. I hope I've raised some in your minds. Thank you so much.
Thank you.